Welcome to another F1 Fantasy video. Thank you very much for all of your support throughout the whole season. I've been working on some new graphics for all fantasy formats, including F1 Fantasy, UCL Fantasy, and FPL. And there's going to be more content throughout the rest of the month, including a first draft video for FPL, as well as the team selections that you're getting right here with F1. I'm going to cover Silverstone in Raceweek 10 and talk about my performance before moving on to Austria, and I'm going to provide you one or two builds potentially, depending on if you have the Mega Driver or not. So let's get straight into this. Let's get this video to 100 likes and consider joining us on Patreon or as a channel member. As you can see, this is my first team in Silverstone and I actually did pretty well. As you can see on the left hand corner of your screen, I scored 226 points. And as we'll get onto very soon, I actually scored a significant number of points more with Team 1 than with Team 2. So I'm closing the gap here, and I'm now around 11,986 in the world. So actually even higher than I was heading into Race Week 9, where I was around 15k. So this is the highest rank I've been all season. I'm quite happy with it, but I can push on a little bit more and perhaps try to aim for a top 10k finish, which would be pretty decent considering it's my first season here. So with my performance in Silverstone, Alonso qualified in 7th and ended up finishing in 5th position. He has been so good in the last few races. Even in Canada, where he had that penalty and ended up finishing 9th, he still was really good throughout the whole weekend. And it's really good to see that he's finally getting the points throughout the whole week. So not just in qualifying, but also in the race, where the bulk of the points and everything that you need is going to be scored in. Carlos Sainz scored his maiden win and also pole position in Formula 1, and I pretty much said this from the beginning of the season. He's probably going to get it at some point. It's just a matter of time, and he showed, I say, a bit of aggression, which you sometimes need to win races, and he was right up for it. He was also challenging the team with the strategy. He got it spot on. Ferrari in general tend to get the strategy wrong, as has been the case for the last decade or so. Sergio Perez was my turbo driver, but before the third practice session, it was actually Carlos Sainz. But after seeing the third practice session, I was more inclined towards the Red Bulls and also Sergio Perez. And I also think the Mexican is better on the race day. And look, he did win Driver of the Day. He went from 17th pretty much after the first or second lap, all the way up to second, with a bit of luck and also help with a safety car. But still, it's not the worst turbo driver in the world, and I still stand by that decision, but I would have earned even more if I had just stuck with Carlos Sainz, who was my original captain, and also he had that qualifying streak already, so that was already a nice way to get an extra 5 points bonus. But ultimately, Perez and Sainz were the best fantasy assets in this race week. Then George Russell, who has been so consistent all season, had a poor qualifying session in 8th position, and then that huge incident in the first lap. It's a really good thing that Guan Yu Zhou is all good, but George Russell actually didn't finish the race, and only a 1-pointer there for the Briton. And there we go. There's not really much we can really say about Russell. I think he will kick on once again. In the last few races, Hamilton has gotten the better of him, but I think things will be more level going into the rest of the season. But I'd expect actually Hamilton to probably have the upper edge now. And then Nicholas Latifi, he qualified in 10th position, but it ended up being Mick Schumacher and Kevin Magnussen who are the best of the cheaper assets, because in the race they made up so many positions. Yes, partly because of the DNFs in the first lap, but they still did an incredible job, and Haas have a lot of pace. Their problem is reliability, and the reason why I went for Latifi is because that Mercedes engine is very reliable, and Williams generally, especially on Latifi's side, have finished pretty much every single race. But that's how my first team did. I'm going to show you all three teams side by side, and you can have a comparison of the three. I'll briefly discuss them before moving on to Austria, and for me, the two best builds for your team. My second team is still leading the pack in terms of overall points, but this weekend it was the lowest performing team of the lot with 143 points. The third team actually scored 7 more, but the first one, which is what mainly counts, just absolutely smashed it off the park. So pretty happy with that. And in terms of other drivers I haven't really mentioned who were in my other teams, it includes Charles Leclerc, who qualified in P3 but ended up finishing the race in 4th. And once again, I don't know why Ferrari didn't just pit him, put him on the new tyres, and he would have had a really good chance of winning the race as well. And ultimately for the championship, it's probably going to be between him, Max Verstappen, and potentially Sergio Perez. But ultimately, the way it's going, you probably would expect Verstappen to run away with it. Then we have Esteban Ocon, who didn't finish the race. The same goes for Valtteri Bottas. Both of them had very similar weekends. Failed to qualify into Q3, and also they didn't finish the race. And then Red Bull, just pretty much covering them. So obviously Verstappen, I alluded to it earlier. He qualified in second position, but ended up finishing the race in 7th after picking up some loose debris in his car. And he did a really good job, actually, to finish the race and to make up some positions at the very end. But ultimately, you could see him slowing down, and there was no chance of him winning the race with all that damage. But ultimately, very, very good. I want to do something very similar going into Austria. Despite Red Bull, I think they will probably dominate. I would still want Ferrari in one of my 3 builds, but I'm going to show you the 2 best teams for Austria. Let me know what you would change, and also who are you going to turbo drive, and if you have the Mega Driver, I think it's going to be clear as day who you should put the turbo driver on. If you still have the Mega Driver, I would heavily consider using on Max Verstappen this weekend. Just bear in mind, actually, a very key point about Race Week 11 is that it's going to be a sprint race weekend. And as we covered in the How to Play video, checked out if you are new to F1 Fantasy, that means that qualifying will take place on Friday. So that's when the deadline will be this time round. Then the sprint race will take the normal qualifying spot on Saturday. And then we have the race as usual on the Sunday. So bear that in mind, it's very important. So try to lock in your team after the kind of first practice session that we get tomorrow. So if you have the Mega Driver, I would probably use it on Verstappen. I'd bring him in, and those of you who got in George Russell ahead of Silverstone, this is a really good placeholder for the Dutchman. You could just go for Ferrari. They do have a race streak. Yes, you'd love to have Red Bull, but you can cover Red Bull drivers with Sergio Perez and Verstappen, and that's a really good way of balancing things out. But ultimately, I think Red Bull will be the best constructor this weekend. Alonso has the qualifying streak, the blue flame, which is pretty nice to see. He's been very consistent recently, and even if he doesn't do that well in the race, he should get plenty of points because of the qualifying, and hopefully anything else will do, a top 10 finish in the actual race. Kevin Magnussen, Latifi, Alex Albon, Mick Schumacher, they're probably the go-to cheaper options, but if Haas can get their reliability issues in check, then Magnussen would be my favourite pick in terms of the budget options. Otherwise, it's probably going to be Nicholas Latifi due to the sheer reliability of the Mercedes engine. So this is a really good build. Bottas, yes, I'd be a bit concerned about the reliability of the Alfa Romeo, but otherwise, this is a very solid draft, and if you have even more money to spare, you can make a few upgrades. Let me know what you would change. My budget isn't exactly the greatest, but this is still a pretty solid draft, and those of you that have the Mega Driver will probably score a lot of points with this build. This is something I'm looking to do with my first team. However, unfortunately, I'm actually 1.3 million over in terms of budget. But for those of you that have the funds, and I know a lot of you will, this is also a very nice way of having Max Verstappen's points covered with the Red Bull constructor. You've got Sergio Perez, who can be your turbo driver, and you've got the 2 Ferrari drivers, Alonso with a streak, and it could be Nicholas Latifi, Magnussen, depending on your preference. And I'd still recommend waiting for the practice sessions, although it can backfire sometimes if you base your decisions mainly off the practice sessions, as was the case for me last weekend by turbo driving Perez when I originally had it on Carlos Sainz. Still made a lot of points, but I lost out a bit due to that decision. So just try to find that balance and don't look too much into the practice sessions, but also try to pick out the useful information and try to make some predictions for the qualifying as well as the race. But what I'm looking to do in order to afford this team myself is to either downgrade Alonso to Bottas or potentially not go for Charles Leclerc, maybe settle for someone like Lando Norris or go for someone even cheaper like Valtteri Bottas. I'll have a lot of money left over, unfortunately, but I can still cover Verstappen's points with Red Bull. I can turbo drive Sergio Perez, have a Ferrari driver. At the moment, Carlos Sainz is the informed one of the two, and it's still a very solid team overall. But for those of you with the funds, definitely go for something like this if you aren't using the Mega Driver or have already used it, such as myself. But that's pretty much the kind of 2 best builds, in my opinion, for Austria. If there are any changes you would make, leave them down in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed this video, smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. Let's try to get this video to 100 likes, and we're on the road to 15,000 subscribers. So thank you very much. You become a Patreon or a channel member. The links are in the description below. There's also a Discord server for F1 Fantasy, UCL Fantasy, and FPL. There's going to be more content throughout the week and also the rest of the month, so stay tuned for that. So take care, enjoy the Formula 1. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram if you want, Dylan RCM. It's all very much appreciated, and I'll catch you in the next video.